Thanks for joining us. I'm Rachel Martin of NPR's Weekend Edition, sitting in for Diane Rehm. The U.S. Justice Department directs all U.S. public schools to allow transgender students to access the restroom of their choice. Donald Trump meets with GOP leaders on Capitol Hill in an effort to unify the Republican Party, and the House passes several bills to combat opioid use, which has reached historic levels in the U.S. Joining me in the studio to talk about these and other top national stories this week, Cheryl Gay Stolberg of the New York Times, John King of CNN, and Lisa Lair of the Associated Press. Welcome to all of you.
Good morning.
Thanks for having us.
And we want you to be part of the conversation. We'll be taking your comments, questions throughout the hour. Call us on 800-433-8850. Send us your email at drshow@wamu.org. Join us on Facebook or Twitter. And because it's Friday and I wore lipstick just for this, we're doing a live video stream this hour you can watch at drshow.org. So let's talk politics, the subject du jour of every day. There was a big meeting on Capitol Hill. Donald Trump went up to make nice with the House leader, Paul Ryan. It was a spectacle outside. There was like a paper mache Donald Trump. There were bagpipes. But it was much more significant what was happening on the inside. Cheryl, what came out of that meeting?
So what came out of that meeting, I think, is the first hint toward party unity. You know, just a week ago, we were reporting that the Donald Trump-Paul Ryan breach might be beyond repair. Paul Ryan said he wasn't ready to support Donald Trump. Donald Trump said, well, I'm not ready to support Paul Ryan's agenda. So this was this big meeting. It was either going to blow up or it was going to be a rapprochement. And I think what we're seeing is the beginnings of the rapprochement. Paul Ryan came out afterwards and said he found Donald Trump warm and genuine, that they still had policy differences he wasn't ready to endorse yet, but that he felt that it was a good first meeting and they were going to talk more, they were going to dig more into the policy weeds.
But this is complicated, John.
Right.
I mean, these are two men who have been at odds on a lot of very important policy issues.
Yeah, this is A and Z trying to figure out if they can somehow coexist. I think they have détente. I'm not sure if they'll ever get peace because they have such significant differences. But if you're Paul Ryan, you have to remember you're a leader of the Republican Party. Many of his House members, he's trying to protect the House majority. Many of them are fine with Trump, or at least they're okay with Trump, because where they're from, especially in the southern districts, you can be tough on immigration. You know, maybe people don't believe Mexico is going to pay for a wall. You can say, let's temporarily ban Muslims. But from Paul Ryan's perspective, they think so far so good, especially in the idea, you now have Mr. Trump saying, well, when I talk about banning Muslims temporarily, that's just an idea. It's just a proposal. It's just to, throw ideas out there, and then I'll work with the Congress. And it's just to say we need to deal with this. It's not really to say I mean all the particulars. And so he seems to be backing off a bit on at least one of the things that had a lot of senior Republicans in Washington saying that might not only cost us the White House, it might cost us the Senate and a lot of House seats.
But what about trade, Lisa? I mean, these fundamental issues that are so important to the Republican Party writ large. I mean, Donald Trump is way out of step.
Right. There are fundamental ideological issues here. Trade is one of them. Privatizing Medicare is another one. That's something Paul Ryan has made really his cause in Washington. It's something that Trump has said he doesn't want to change those programs, although he backed away slightly. His advisor backed away slightly from that this week. So it's hard to pin him down. But to me, this kind of felt like two kids out on a date after their parents had already arranged the marriage. The Republican Party cannot spend the next 6 months in open warfare against Donald Trump. They have to reach some
They don't
kind
have a
of
choice.
Detente with him. And the most striking comments, I thought, came not from Paul Ryan, but from Lindsey Graham, who had called Donald Trump a nut job and a loser as a person. He spoke to him on the phone on Wednesday. And after that, he said he was warm. He was funny. He was cordial. He's got a great sense of humor, he said. He's from New York. He obviously can take a punch. He's not, endorsing him per se, but he said the insults will stop. I think that's where a lot of these guys are. And I think Paul Ryan also wants to give his members some space to figure out where they want to be on this. There are people from southern districts who have endorsed Trump. There's a lot of people from battleground districts who this is a lot more trickier.
This is all about
for them
protecting
politically.
the down ticket.
Right.
I think that though the person who really has a lot to lose here, I think more to lose is Paul Ryan, because if you look at these two men, there are no two people on this earth who are more opposite than Paul Ryan and Donald Trump. Trump is flexible. He's malleable. He's all about personality. Ryan is a man of serious conservative principles and ideals. So, and Ryan is also thinking about a run for himself in 2020. Should Hillary Clinton either be elected, or should Donald Trump, should Hillary Clinton be elected? So you've got sort of the deal maker against the ideologue. And I think that Trump has already said, look, I'm willing to be flexible. My proposed ban on Muslims was just an idea. But for Paul Ryan to be flexible on his principles, I think poses a lot more of a danger to him.
And Donald Trump doesn't actually need his endorsement.
Exactly. So I think Ryan is especially interesting to watch here, and is dancing this very delicate dance. And it's really a question here for him: will party Trump ideology? No pun intended. No pun intended there.
It's changed for us, John.
It's a test of competing theories of politics. Trump has brought his own personal theory of politics, which is, I can campaign at 30,000 feet. I can do rallies at 25,000 people. I don't need a tough, high-tech data operation. I don't need a party infrastructure. In his view, and the data does not support this right now, but in his view, all these Bernie Sanders voters are going to cross over. All the independents are going to say Hillary Clinton's old news. She's traditional politics, and come to him. Versus the Democrats, who have this nuts and bolts from the Obama campaign, 2 cycles of very sophisticated voter targeting. And on the Republican side, you're going to have some people who say, yeah, I'm for Trump, but they're not going to work it. They're not going to work hard. They're not going to help him raise money. They're not going to pull the levers of their own personal political infrastructure. On the Democratic side, look what we've seen in the last week. The president, the first lady, Elizabeth Warren, even Bernie Sanders, who still says he's running for the nomination, and he has every right to keep running for the nomination. He's not mathematically eliminated yet, says, over my dead body will Donald Trump be president. So he's making clear that he'll rally his supporters. And then you have Secretary Clinton. So the Democrats are saying all hands on deck, and using organization, using party resources, using the levers of politics. Trump says, I'm going to do Air Force Trump, and just boom, blow you out my way. We'll see what happens.
It really is a repudiation of like the past 3 cycles of political research and advancement. The idea that you're going to throw away big data, it's really a striking idea. But it's, he thinks he can basically run on free media and personality.
Which he has so far.
Which he has. But I think that, for Paul Ryan, there's an unpredictability with Donald Trump that he doesn't want. Paul Ryan doesn't know what Donald Trump is going to be saying 3 months from now, never mind like a week from now. So I think he wants to mitigate that risk a little bit, give this all a little time to breathe, give his members a little time to breathe.
Can we talk about Marco Rubio? I mean, I guess we knew that this was going to come down, but still it surprised some people that he's given his official endorsement to Donald Trump.
I think Marco Rubio is also in a bind, right? During his campaign, Marco Rubio was very, very explicit about all the reasons he had serious reservations about Trump. He had reservations about his policies. He had reservations about the way he spoke about Muslims. He called him, or essentially, a fearmonger. He said he would not want to have to explain Trump to his own children. But he also pledged to endorse or to support the party's nominee. So now we see him saying, okay, I promise to support the party's nominee, and I'm going to do that, but my reservations still remain. So I think what will be interesting to see is how enthusiastically does Marco Rubio support the nominee?
John was saying.
Is he going to get out there and be on the stump for Donald Trump in his home state of Florida? Is he going to raise money for him? Is he going to appear as a surrogate for Donald Trump? I frankly don't think so. I find that hard to envision.
And he basically said as much. I mean, these endorsements of Donald Trump, these Republican Party endorsements, have become an art form. He said, this is his quote, Donald Trump is the only other choice on the ballot. I mean, that is not a ringing endorsement.
Super psyched.
So he is not
options.
super psyched. And I think we're hearing a lot of that from Republican parties. So, it goes to what John is saying about tapping those networks. I just don't see that happening.
I support, but I'm not endorsing. What did Kelly Ayotte say?
And it could be that state could become an example of whether this Trump's way works or the data way works and the targeting way works. Because imagine that the Bush family says never Trump. They're going to boycott the convention. They're not for Trump. So you won't have Jeb Bush's help. He's been off the bike a long time in Florida. So you might say, who cares? Didn't perform very well in this campaign. Marco Rubio, he did lose the Florida primary. He got blown out pretty good by Mr. Trump, but he has a network. He has friends there. If he's not going to help Donald Trump in the state of Florida, does that matter? Does that matter?
We're having a conversation. He's also an important Hispanic voice. Right. He's an important Latino voice in a state that has a large Latino electorate, many of whom have traditionally voted Republican because the Cubans have, traditionally been Republicans. We're seeing a bigger influx of Puerto Rican voters who will tilt registration among Latinos toward Democrats in Florida. But that's Donald Trump is going to push Hispanic Democrats to the polls to vote for Hillary Clinton.
Essentially, though, in this moment, are we seeing a reluctant circling of the wagons of the establishment in the GOP?
I think for the most part, yes, at least rhetorically saying he won fair and square, and he did win fair and square. And so the board, if you will, the Mitch McConnells, the Paul Ryans, the Washington establishment, this Trump takeover has been voted by the shareholders. And the board finds itself in a very awkward position because they oppose him on just about everything. But at some point, if you're in politics, you have to acknowledge the customer is always right, isn't he or she? Mm-hmm. The voters have sent Donald Trump there. So there's a lesson to be learned, even as they resist. It's very hard. You mentioned the trade issue. It's very hard for a party that has been committed to free trade deals, has been committed to globalism, to embrace a guy who in his foreign policy speech said, we're no longer going to answer to the false song of globalism. That's Donald Trump speaking. That's the Republican nominee speaking. Hard for them to embrace him, but they also can't run from him because their voters elected him.
He's kind of hijacked their party. Yeah. I mean, that's what we're seeing is the disintegration almost of what we thought was the Republican Party. When George Bush was president, we used to talk about the three legs, right? You had the fiscal conservatives, you had the social conservatives, and you had sort of the mainstream. Well, now you've got this whole other wing that's sort of the new Trump, the nativist wing.
It's something new. Coming up, more of the Friday News Roundup. You can see all our guests on our live video stream at drshow.org. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm Rachel Martin with NPR's Weekend Edition, sitting in for Diane Rehm. And I'm joined in the studio by Cheryl Gay Stolberg, national correspondent for the New York Times, John King, chief national correspondent for CNN, and Lisa Lair, national politics reporter for the Associated Press. And we are talking presidential politics. We've spent the last few minutes focused on the GOP and the fault lines within the party. Let's shift our attention, if we could, over to the Democratic side of the race. We got an email from William who says, Bernie Sanders is running to win. Please watch Oregon and Kentucky and report accurately. The race is not over, even if the overpaid pundits think it is. They were not right about Donald Trump either. Bernie Sanders did walk away with a couple of victories recently.
He did walk away with victories in Nevada and West Virginia, but the math is still very hard for Bernie Sanders. Nebraska. Sorry. Nebraska, one of those end states.
Western states.
Right.
Yeah.
The math is still very hard for Bernie Sanders. In order to overcome Clinton's delegate lead, he would have to win roughly 2/3, I think, of the remaining delegates. And he would also have to win superdelegates. And
so
this
talk
is
about
be
what
really
that means
hard.
And why that's complicated, John.
But the thing that makes it most complicated is that the person who wrote the email is exactly right. We should watch Kentucky and see what happens, see if it models after West Virginia. But he won West Virginia, even though he had a 15-point victory. He had about 52% of the vote, 51% of the vote. He only picked up 7 delegates net. over Clinton because of the Democratic Party
Yeah.
rules. Maybe he'll win Oregon by a bigger margin. He won Washington State with 70-something%. He won Idaho with 70-something%. But he needs, to Cheryl's point, he needs 67% of the remaining delegates. There's just shy of 900 delegates left. Well, 62% of those delegates are in California. The other big slice are in New Jersey. This is not to Senator Sanders has done something extraordinary. Senator Sanders has created a movement, and he has, as I said at the beginning of the campaign, she's an aircraft carrier, and he's kind of a dinghy. Well, the dinghy's put a lot of dents in the aircraft carrier, and it's remarkable.
He's pushed her. He's pushed her to the left.
Pulled her. I would say he's pulled her as opposed to pushing her. He's come here. But just to be honest, I'm not trying to criticize Senator Sanders, and I'm not trying to alienate his supporters. Can you see Bernie Sanders getting 67% in New Jersey? Can you see Senator Sanders getting 67% in California? Is it possible? Sure it is. But if you look at the map, you look at past contests, places where you do have a significant or sizable African-American population or significant or sizable Latino population, Secretary Clinton, in most cases, has won those states. But in any case, she will perform. She's not going to get 30% of the vote or 32% of the vote. It's hard to see that happening.
The statistic to me that's most striking is she can win 14%. She can win. She can lose by 14%, collect 14% of the remaining races, and still become the nominee.
It's a low bar.
It's a really low bar. The only way for him to do this at this point is to switch superdelegates. And not just a couple dozen superdelegates like that flip from Clinton to Obama in 2008. He has to switch hundreds of superdelegates.
And superdelegates, by their nature, are establishment type folk.
Right. They're party insiders. So it's really hard to see that happening because these are people who are very strong Democrats who have a strong commitment to the party. And he's a guy that just became a Democrat basically to run for president. And his supporters have launched this very aggressive campaign where they've been calling these superdelegates and really in some cases harassing them, for several months at this point. So that doesn't really make them inclined to switch their views. So it's hard to see this is anything but all but over. And there's some frustration, I think, from folks in the Democratic Party now that Trump has locked things up. They want to see Senator Sanders get out and allow the party to unify.
But here's what Senator Sanders has achieved. And like John said, it really is extraordinary. He has really tapped into the energy in the Democratic Party. And the energy in the party is on the left. It's for a more progressive agenda. It's voters who, just like Republicans who have been fed up with the status quo and voted for Donald Trump, that you're hearing that same sentiment among voters who are fed up with the status quo, who feel aggrieved. They feel like the system is rigged, as Elizabeth Warren used to say, and as Bernie Sanders says, that the billionaires have taken over. And that is really where the energy in the party is.
These people come out to vote for Hillary Clinton?
I think both she and Senator Sanders have some work to do.
Yeah, and I think some of them will vote for Trump. It is amazing to me when I talk to voters, how many people I've spoken to who said, I like Sanders and I like Trump.
Right. New and different. People are looking for new and different. Hillary Clinton has many, many strengths. You could have a long list of her strengths, and often experience as she has, the resume she has, often that's a great asset in a political campaign. Not this cycle. People want something new. They want something different. They want somebody who they trust to change Washington. And for all of Secretary Clinton's strengths, I don't think if you look at Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders, or Hillary Clinton, say who's least likely to change Washington? Most people would bet on Hillary Clinton.
But this intersection between Trump supporters and Sanders supporters is still confounding to me.
They're the
and
flip
many.
side of the same coin. We have the capitalist and the socialist, and they're both populists, and that's what they're tapping into.
Trade and wages, trade and different and change. Trade, the specifics are the economics. You're exactly right. The populism and your wages haven't gone up in 15 years. The politicians you keep electing aren't listening to you. They're not helping you.
And those are single issue voters. Right. I mean, they care enough about it
the question is how many of them are there? I mean, I think there are some of those people, but I'm not sure frankly, I'm just not sure they're a huge group. Like Bernie Sanders won Michigan. For Trump to win Michigan is not outside the realm, but it's pretty tough, I think. It's a Democratic state. The more interesting question to me is, and this is certainly a target for the Clinton campaign, is these suburban, independent, maybe even Republican women, in the suburbs of Columbus, in the suburbs of Washington. Do they flip? Maybe they voted for Rubio or for Governor Bush. Do they flip over to Hillary Clinton because they just don't like Donald Trump's tone? They don't like what he said about women, and they don't like where he is on foreign policy. She started to make that push. You'll see her start to make that push an awful lot harder when Sanders is out of the race. Her advisors feel that if she starts pushing aggressively targeting moderate Republicans while Sanders is still in the race, it's just too complicated. You're sort of baiting him to go after you.
So this is a tough moment for her. She's fighting
a two-front war.
Fronts.
Yep.
Without a doubt.
Exactly.
And don't underestimate, though, how Trump has surprised us is that he had the broadest coalition in the Republican Party. When he first started, we thought he was going to get sort of the Tea Party people or Tea Party-like people, new voters who just wanted change, just wanted something different, anti-establishment. But go to the Virginia results and look how well he did against Rubio in the suburbs just outside of Washington. Go to some other states and look how he did in the suburbs.
But
where
who
you
are
thought
those
this was Rubio's
voters,
place.
John? Are those Hispanics? Are those
I
minorities?
think it's everybody, Rachel. And I think, let's see if my colleagues disagree, but I just think that we start by thinking evangelicals are going to vote for Cruz because he's the Tea Party evangelical guy, and suburban voters are going to pick a Bush or a Rubio because that's the mainstream, and that's usually the case. That's you always study the last campaign when you're covering the current campaign. Well, we've had to throw all that out because I think evangelicals want change. They're disgusted with Washington and upset with Washington. Suburban college-educated women who may have nothing in common with those evangelicals on a policy, if you said list your top 10 policy priorities, have nothing in common with them. Guess what? They agree Washington's broken. They've invested in it. They keep voting for traditional politicians and, in their view, getting nothing back. And so they share that. They share the desire to change Washington. They share the agreement that Washington politics are broken, and they're setting aside the traditional way they usually vote and thinking outside the box.
I do think Lisa makes a really important point about women, though. I mean, certainly Democratic women are enraged by Donald Trump and by his statements about women, which I think can frankly only be called misogynist. So it will be interesting to see how will Donald Trump try to repair that. We've already seen him put his daughter, who is very poised and an excellent Ivanka, an excellent spokeswoman for him, out there saying, don't listen to what my father says, listen to what he does. He's promoted women. He respects
It's hard
women.
not to listen to what he says. It's gotta be
Right. Well, but,
megaphone.
watch what he does, not what he says, she'll say. But I think, the issue of women and can women and will moderate Republican women line up behind Donald Trump is a big
What's
question.
so interesting to me is when you talk to voters, how unpleasant a choice this is for them.
Yes.
Like both these candidates have such high unfavorability ratings that when you go and you have these long conversations with voters, whether they're suburban women or working class men in Michigan, they'll say, well, I don't like him. I don't like her. I don't know what to do. It's really
The
amazing.
happiest man in Washington, Barack Obama.
Yeah.
Because
All of a
he looks
sudden.
good and his numbers are starting to go up.
Well, what about these recent polls, though, that show, much to Democrats' chagrin, Donald Trump closing the gap in one-on-one polling with Hillary Clinton?
I think that goes to Lisa's point. That people are unhappy with their choices. At the moment, there's more attention being focused on Trump. There has, you could say, pretty much consistently through the campaign. It'll be interesting to see over the next couple of weeks where the competition is actually now left on the Democratic side, whether the more attention focused on the Democratic race will help Hillary Clinton in that regard. But nationally, she wins quite convincingly. When you go state by state, let's see the second time they poll Florida, the second time they poll Pennsylvania, the second time they poll Ohio, if those Quinnipiac numbers that came out a week ago hold up. But what they tell you is that this will be, we're in May. I would not invest more than a penny or nickel in polls in May and what they tell you about what's going to happen in November. I would save that money for something else. But what it does tell you as you raise the curtain on the general election, that it looks like it could be very competitive in the 6 or 8 states necessary to have a tug of war. Let's see if it stays that way. I agree with the targeting of women in particular. The big challenge for Trump in a general election is in the Republican primaries. In most states, the voters are majority men on primary day in the Republican primaries. On the general election, we know that in Virginia, it'll be 55% women. In Florida, it'll be 55% women. In every general election state, or battleground state anyway, you'll have majority woman electorate compared to what Mr. Trump had in the Republican primaries, which are dominated by men. So we shall see.
The interesting thing, not to get a little nerdy here, but the interesting thing about some of those polls to me was how they didn't quite know how to model the electorate. Like the Quinnipiac poll was one of the ones that came out, and they basically assumed an electorate that was about 5 points wider than what we saw during President Barack Obama. And no one really knows if that's right. Like theoretically, African-American voters should turn out in lower rates because there isn't the first Black president on the ticket. But, Hillary Clinton is running against the original birther. So maybe they want to defend his, President Obama's legacy. Latinos, there's more of them. They're young demographically. They're very young. We've seen higher registration rates. We don't have good numbers on that. So maybe more of them come to the polls. We just don't know. And it seems to me like the pollsters don't quite know either.
But historically, do people like to vote for someone, or do they vote against someone, or as you say, protecting Obama's legacy?
I want to share with you something really interesting that David Axelrod, President Obama's chief strategist, wrote to President Obama 10 years ago in 2006. He says he advised Obama that the most important person in the election of 2008 was not going to be on the ballot, and that it was going to be George W. Bush, and that voters at the end of a two-term presidency want to elect somebody who is the polar opposite of the incumbent. They look in personality and in style, that all of the strengths that they perceived when electing, say, Obama, who was perceived as deliberative and cautious and thoughtful, etc., voters now view those as weaknesses, and they want to elect the opposite. And David went through sort of history about why this has happened. And he essentially made a case in January, before the Iowa caucuses even, of why Donald Trump was going to be a force to watch. And it's because he's the polar opposite of the man who's in the Oval Office now.
I'm Rachel Martin with NPR's Weekend Edition, and you're listening to The Diane Rehm Show. If you'd like to join us, call 1-800-433-8850 or send an email to drshow@wamu.org. Find us on Facebook, send us a tweet. Don't forget, you can see all our guests on our live video stream at drshow.org. I'd like to go to a caller. This is an interesting question we've got from Gary in Cleveland, Ohio. Hey, Gary, you're on the air.
Hey, thank you very much. Great show, great panel. My question is, I wonder how your panel felt about the idea that Donald Trump would have been better off running as a Democrat. He wouldn't have had to trash women and minorities and Muslims, and he could have been Bernie Sanders on steroids.
Thank you so much for your call, panel.
Donald Trump is running as Donald Trump, and if he had run as a Democrat, he'd be trashing women and Hillary Clinton and Muslims and all the other things. He is a Trumpian. He's not really a Democrat or a Republican.
Well, that's the point, and I think that's what the caller is trying to get at, is that Donald Trump is not a conservative as we have known them to be running for the GOP nomination.
And he's subverting all the conventional rules of politics. We had the issue with the tax returns. He said that he wasn't going to release his tax returns this week. I mean, that's something that every presidential nominee has done, usually release like a decade of returns in recent history. So this is a pretty big break, and it certainly has caused a lot of people to wonder why he's not releasing them. I've heard a bunch of good theories.
Well, he says he's being audited. He's worth a lot of money, and it's routine to be audited, and he says he will release them when the audit's done.
I'm no tax expert, but the letter he released saying he was being audited, I think it says he's under review. There's distinctions within IRS reviews, and I'm not even sure he's being audited from the legal perspective or just being reviewed. I'm sure the distinction there, but the IRS has repeatedly said there is no prohibition on it. Somebody who's being audited, even if you're getting the most thorough Roto-Rooter audit possible, there's no prohibition on you releasing those materials. So he could release past years. He could release some of this year's if he wanted to just release the summaries and say, I'm sorry, I'm in the middle of this legal investigation. He could do more than he's doing. Let's put it that way. These are his documents. It's his financial disclosure. It's completely within his right. He has decided for whatever reason not to do this.
And at AP, we actually dug up one of those past years. Granted, because the casinos, he had to submit some of these to the various regulatory agencies. And what we found was he paid a very, very low tax rate, which is not unusual for real estate. You can depreciate your assets. You can carry forward losses. So that's one theory, that he didn't pay very much in taxes. The other theory, of course, you don't account for your assets in your return. So his net worth may be a bit lower than he would like.
I think
people
that's
to
the
see
real
it to be.
theory, because I think on the taxes, he'll just say, well, I'm a businessman. I followed the rules. I paid the taxes I was due. But I think that, to me, is the issue, is what is his net worth? Because Donald Trump is all about, I'm a winner, I made a lot of money, I'm successful. If those tax returns show that he is somehow less successful than he has portrayed himself to be, that is what he is,
Diminish the brand
about.
a bit.
Yes, exactly.
I want to shift our attention to nod to a couple things that happened on Capitol Hill this past week. The House GOP scored a big victory yesterday on Obamacare subsidies. This is a fight they've been fighting for a long time. John, how significant is this ruling?
Well, it's significant in the sense that they won a court ruling that said essentially in this one Bush appointee, George W. Bush federal judge appointee, says that the Congress did not appropriate the money for one of these subsidy programs, the insurance companies subsidizing for low-income people, and therefore the administration is breaking the rules by finding the money to put into the program. Said, no, Congress didn't directly appropriate that money. You can't do this. The administration will appeal. In most cases, the administration has won on the appeal. What it tells you is they keep fighting this. They keep fighting this years in. They keep fighting this.
But they have
no-
to, right? They have said, they have told their constituents that this is
They
a
have,
fight they're gonna
and I
keep
think
waging.
you make a great point, because sometimes when you get out and you talk to voters about the dysfunction of Washington, they say, why have they voted 40 something times or 50 something times now to repeal Obamacare? Well, in those districts, those candidates, go back and look at their advertising, go back and look at their statements. They said, I'm going to go to Washington and I'm going to do everything I can. I'm going to go to Washington. Anything Obama says yes, I say no. And so the American people have sent these people here. Not the people of San Francisco didn't send those guys from South Carolina here, but that's the way it works. And so the House Republicans have committed to doing this. But it tells you, we'll see what happens in the courts, but it tells you we are having yet another election cycle in which Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, will be front and center as an issue.
I want to continue our conversation. We are talking about presidential politics. We're talking about important bills that have come up on Capitol Hill in the last week, and we have all kinds of calls and emails to get to. Stay with us. Your calls and questions for our panel coming up next. You are listening to The Diane Rehm Show. For Diane Rehm, and I'm joined in studio today by Cheryl Gay Stolberg of the New York Times, John King of CNN, and Lisa Lair of the AP. And we've been talking politics. I'm going to shift our attention, though, to a big news story: the U.S. government weighing in on transgender rights. And this, of course, is all stemmed from this debate that's happening in the state of North Carolina over their controversial HB 2 law, so-called bathroom law. Today, the Obama administration has weighed in a pretty unprecedented way. Cheryl, can you get us up to speed on what happened?
So the administration is sending a letter to every public school in the country saying that you are at risk of losing your federal education funding, billions of dollars of funding, if the schools do not allow students to use the bathroom that corresponds with the gender with which they identify. So this is obviously in direct opposition to this North Carolina law, which says that people must use the bathroom that corresponds with the gender assigned on their birth certificate. And this is really the next frontier in LGBTQ rights, right? We now have same-sex marriage as the law of the land. We saw last year in Houston a big fight over an expansive bill to protect civil rights for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people. It was rejected, and it was rejected around a very simple message. The opponents said, no men in women's bathrooms. And now I think what we're seeing is this whole fight, frankly, around transgender rights is coming down to a fight over bathrooms. That's what's happening in North Carolina, and the Obama administration has now directly weighed in here and said that this is a violation of civil rights, that transgender people have a right under the 1964 Civil Rights Act to use the bathroom of their choice, and public schools get with it, or you're going to lose a lot of money if you don't.
And it's an interesting legal question, right? The legal question is basically, is transgender a protected class under the Civil Rights Act? And that's what a lot of this litigation, particularly, the dueling suits now and over the North Carolina bathroom law.
We should say the Department of Justice has sued North Carolina. North Carolina
has
has
countersued
government.
And that's really the question that they're deciding. The Obama administration clearly sees this as the next frontier in the civil rights movement. We'll have to see where the courts come down.
John.
But the administration made a conscious choice. It could have just had the suit with North Carolina. This education department directive is a conscious choice by the administration to take it nationally and to make clear that this president in his final months in office wants to advance this ball and wants to deal with this issue. And when you had the attorney general not only saying we will defend you in court, but she used the words Loretta Lynch did, we see you.
It was
the administration is making
kind of
the administration is making a very clear statement here about where it wants to go and where it believes the country is going. And if you think about this from the perspective of social conservatives, they have lost repeatedly, including a Supreme Court that they think that thought had a conservative majority on same-sex marriage. And so social conservatives have been increasingly taking their fights to the state level, like in North Carolina. And now you have a national administration fighting back against them. This is going to carry forward for a few years as we settle what I think you rightly call the next frontier.
It's also interesting because the administration was fairly late on the issue of same-sex marriage. So you do get the sense that they don't want to be behind the ball on this issue.
This is something that the Obama administration sees as key to their legacy.
And this was really a remarkable moment, frankly, to see Loretta Lynch, African-American female attorney general, granddaughter of sharecroppers, stand up and say, and she grew up in North Carolina, say this is akin to Brown v. Board of Education. This is a civil rights matter.
I want to turn to our callers who have politics on their mind. So we might go back and talk a little presidential politics. I'm going to bring in Seamus of Boca Raton, Florida. Hi, Seamus, you're on the air.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing well.
I'm new to the show. Excellent show. But my point is that the only way you're going to get change in Washington, obviously, is to get money out of politics and perhaps get the large corporations to pay their fair share of taxes.
Money out of politics. Seamus, thanks so much for your call. John, how likely is that?
Well, given the Supreme Court ruling in Citizens United, not so likely in the short term. The only way to do that is to have an overwhelming change in the Congress and have lawmakers willing to deal with this issue. And you just simply don't have that right now. I will say this, that for all the people who entered this cycle thinking that, you had these 17 Republican candidates who are all going to have, 5 or 6 of them are going to have these multi-million-dollar super PACs. And super PACs were now the levers that pulled the chains and made the decisions in American politics. Not so much. Not so much. Donald Trump's just blew right through that. And Jeb Bush, I think, that giant flushing sound is $100 million of Jeb Bush's fundraising that did nothing. And so I completely respect the caller's perspective, and voters feel this. This is why Trump, I fund myself, I'm different, I'm rich, I'm not beholden to anybody. Bernie Sanders.
And that's why Bernie.
Yeah,
exactly.
Bernie Sanders changed the system. This is why they have appeal, because people certainly feel that to their bones, that the rich get richer, the rich have a rigged system, and they get nothing.
I want to go to George in Bardstown, Kentucky. Hi, George, you're on the air.
Hello. Love the show. First time caller.
Great.
I was curious. I'm hearing the word flexible and softening tones with Donald Trump.
Uh-huh.
We had a candidate few years back who changed his mind on a certain position, and he was bombarded with the word flip-flopper. Why isn't Donald Trump being bombarded with this word? I mean,
Talking about
he's
John
pretty morally
Kerry there.
ambiguous.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your call, George.
Well, I think part of the
Lisa.
reason is that I know the Clinton campaign believes that they can do a lot stronger than flip-flopper. I think their goal here is to try to attack him as someone who's untrustworthy. You don't know where he stands. It's not that he's changed his position. It's that he never really had positions or convictions to begin with. So I think that's a lot more of the kind of depiction. I think if Democrats tried to paint Mitt Romney as a heartless plutocrat, I think they're going to try to paint this summer, particularly try to paint Donald Trump as a con man.
I think the reason it doesn't stick is because, frankly, we know that Donald Trump is a flip-flopper. He's the one saying, I'm totally flexible. But what we will see are the Clinton people making the case that he's dangerous. And we're already seeing that, especially on foreign policy. That
and questions about his character and his personality, his temperament. We saw recently the story in the Washington Post that he took on a persona of a PR guy when he was dealing with certain media representatives. He denies this, but it's this interesting look into how he has managed his brand over the years.
And how to him the Democrats will raise the question, and Hillary Clinton's super PAC Priorities USA is getting ready to do this in a number of states, that is it, as Paul Manafort, Trump's own late to the campaign advisor, said at the Republican meeting in Florida not that long ago, is much of it an act? Is he performing all the time? And Democrats are going to try to turn that and say, don't believe this guy. To Lisa's point, he's a con man.
I want to go to Jeff in St. Augustine, Florida. Hi, Jeff. You're on the air.
Oh, hey, good morning. I'll try to be concise. 3 quick things. Trump agrees with the left on the bathroom thing, so that would be another loss for conservatives. If I didn't see so many trucks with Confederate flags, in some cases flying off of them, and NRA stickers all with Trump signs also, I would possibly consider voting for him. The next point is on the math for Bernie Sanders. I've been an early supporter of his. I'm a little bit dubious about the so-called revolution, but if he can win Oregon and California, and he can mobilize hundreds of thousands of supporters in the streets in Philadelphia, I don't think the superdelegates are going to have much of a choice.
Thanks so much for your call, Jeff. I mean, does he have a point that is there such a thing as just the inevitability of momentum?
I mean, she's gotten more votes, right? Rallies do not predict electoral outcomes. You can have a really big rally and still be losing, and the math is just not there for him. He also has to me, the revolution, while he's accomplished a lot, he's certainly pulled her to the left in a lot of issues. The revolution has been fairly specific into whom it's attracted. She's done significantly better with minority voters who form a big part of that Democratic Party. She's done better with women, particularly older women. So it's hard to see the party, overruling the popular vote, the pledged delegates, and the superdelegates for one segment of their party.
John?
I think the question will become, and the caller makes a great point, there are still 11 contests out there, 8 states, and then the U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and District of Columbia is the last one. Senator Sanders has every right to go forward. It's just 67% of the remaining delegates to beat her by 1, and pledged delegates is pretty hard math. We'll see how it plays out. But then comes the question, what does he want? What does Senator Sanders want if he falls a little short? And does Secretary Clinton accommodate him?
What does he want?
He wants the platform, and we're already seeing her accommodate him. For instance, on Medicare, she said that she has strongly resisted his call for single-payer health care, which he describes as Medicare for all. Now she is saying, well, she always believed in the public option. The public option was debated when the president's health care bill passed Congress early in his administration, and it was basically an essence that you could have the government provide you health care. She's saying, well, maybe people 50 or 55 and older should be allowed to buy into Medicare. So that's what he wants. He wants, if he can't be the nominee, his ideas to be embraced by the party.
Let's not forget that he also has a strong personal incentive to make sure Democrats have a good run this election. If Democrats retake control of the Senate, he would most likely be chairman of the powerful, very powerful Senate Budget Committee. That is a good job where you can get a lot of things done if you're Bernie Sanders. So, his colleagues in the Senate believe that he will be helpful once they get into the fall.
I want to at least nod to something that happened on Capitol Hill this past week. Some attention being paid to the opioid crisis in this country. Capitol Hill now fixating on this, trying to pass legislation. What do we know about these bills? What difference can they possibly make? Cheryl, have you been following this?
So what we know is that there is a package of 18 bills before the Congress, and they include measures that would make it easier for doctors to treat patients addicted to opioids, give law enforcement officers greater authority to, block drug trafficking, greater protection for veterans and children affected by the whole opioid epidemic. And there is an opioid crisis in this country. And I think this is one area where we are likely to see a rare agreement on Capitol Hill, and the White House wants to do something about this as well. And, this is important for lawmakers, frankly, who go home and have to show that they've done something. We're seeing senators like Rob Portman, for instance, in Ohio. He's in a tough re-election battle. It's a swing state. He's been talking about the opioid epidemic for months out on the campaign trail.
And
so
this is
one
something
of
we
those
could see some bipartisan
rare
agreement.
Yeah, it's a rare, there's always got to be some moment of unity, whether it's passing the transportation bill or something that the public wants. And the public does want this.
There is still a subset fight over where the money comes from. Democrats are trying
How
to
do you
get
pay for
hundreds
it?
of $1 millions in new money. Republicans are saying this should be money, because of their concerns about the budget deficit. They say, let's find money in other programs and redirect it. So there's some of the traditional haggling over money, but this rare bipartisanship is extraordinary. And as someone who covered the crime bill back in the Clinton days that has become an issue during the Democratic campaign from time to time, the tone is so much different. The compassion in this opioid debate, as opposed to the punishment tone of the 1990s crime bill debate, I think is quite striking.
I'm Rachel Martin with NPR's Weekend Edition, and you're listening to The Diane Rehm Show. We'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to join us, call 1-800-433-8850. Send an email to drshow@wamu.org. Find us on Facebook or send us a tweet. And don't forget, you can see all our guests on our live video stream at drshow.org. And I want to go now to Joe in Rochester, New York. Hi, Joe. You're on the air.
Hi. I've heard before that nativism is one of the central definers of conservatism in Europe. And it seems like that's true in the United States now. Do you think that's changed? Do you think there's more nativism, or do you think it's always been here and it's just coming to the surface now?
Thanks for your question. Throw it to the panel. Who wants to take?
I think there's a couple things going on. I think there's a sense that we were talking before that, the economy is rigged, politics is rigged, that the average person can no longer get ahead. That's borne out by some economic data, like the economic recovery. While the country has recovered from the recession, wages haven't improved. Certainly the federal minimum wage hasn't gone up. So people feel tighter. And then I think there's this whole set of social changes, the transgender bathroom issue that we were talking about before, that, people feel that the country's moving in ways, there's a certain segment of the population that feels that the country's moving in ways in which they are not prepared to go. So there's a number of things going on, but I think economics and the feeling that things have just gotten harder is the main driver. And when you feel that way, you look for various people to blame.
Yeah, I think, though, that it is unfair to equate conservatism with nativism. When George Bush was president, he very pointedly spoke out about the Muslim faith as a faith of tolerance. He said, our war is against terrorists. It is not against Muslims. When John McCain ran against Barack Obama and someone accused Obama of being an Arab and a terrorist, John McCain stood up and he said, no, ma'am, I'm sorry, that's not right. He's a good man, a family man. I simply disagree with him on policy. And we've already talked in the show about how Donald Trump is really, frankly, not a conservative. So I think while there may be a strain in America of nativism, I don't think it's fair to equate the two, or to say that the nativists are taking over the conservative movement somehow.
I think it's part of the tug of war. The conservative movement, the Republican Party, often two different things. Conservatives are often at odds with the party itself. But I do think there's a tug of war. And to Cheryl's point, historically, you can see Bush, you can see McCain. You can go back to 1996 when Pat Buchanan's central theme was America First. That was his whole pitch. And he was a somewhat effective candidate, helped knock Phil Gramm from the race, but then lost to Bob Dole. He had a limit to his appeal. But Trump has obviously stretched that limit in this cycle. This is why Paul Ryan and these other Republicans have this dilemma
That's
over
why Marco Rubio
how
is so
close do we hug
uneasy.
him? Yeah, because they hope this doesn't last. But he's their nominee at the moment, and so it's sort of like grabbing a rodeo bull and trying to hold on to November.
Okay, we've covered the range of issues surrounding presidential politics. We've talked about transgender rights and the battle over legislation in North Carolina. There's one important story we have not tackled yet. It is the naming of the national mammal. You guys following this?
Okay,
It's very important.
in favor. Who's in favor
Of a national mammal? The bison, ladies and gentlemen, has been named. President Obama signed a law on Monday making the bison the country's first national mammal. Now, I hail from a part of the country where we revere the bison. I'm from Idaho. I will also say something controversial. They are delicious. I have had a bison burger.
And doctors tell you they're better for you than other meats.
They're healthy.
You're part of the, yeah, I love the bison lobby, which
Yeah.
is ranchers, conservationists, tribal groups. You're part of the bison lobby.
I'm
Plus,
part of the bison.
someone from Pennsylvania, a lawmaker, wanted to name the groundhog. I mean, come on, the groundhog. What's more American than a bison? A bison is big.
Yes.
It weighs a ton. It's powerful.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even replace the bald eagle, which is the national animal, but we don't have a national mammal, so why not?
Give the bison its rightful place in American history and American culture.
Ted Turner thanks you.
Ted Turner, thanks me. You're welcome, Ted Turner. Oh, it's been a great discussion. Thanks so much for joining us. Cheryl Gay Stolberg, national correspondent for the New York Times, John King, correspondent with CNN, and Lisa Lair of the AP. I'm Rachel Martin with NPR's Weekend Edition, sitting in for Diane Rehm. Thanks so much for listening.
The Diane Rehm Show is produced by Sandra Pinkard, Denise Couture, Rebecca Kaufman, Lisa Dunn, Alexandra Botti, Susan Casey, Danielle Knight, and Allison Brody. The engineer is Alex Drewenskas. Visit drshow.org for audio archives, transcripts, and podcasts. Our email address is drshow@wamu.org. And we're on Facebook and Twitter. This program comes to you from American University in Washington. This is NPR.